Okay, so to set up the background so that we get a nice snap to grid background, I'm going to go to the preferences and the guides and grids. Okay. Under guides and grids, it's going to ask you to color the grid. And I highly recommend a bright color like this bright green, because it shows up really well even when we start drawing on top of it. And what I've set it up for here is that every 80 pixels has 4 subdivisions, and that the guides are a different color. But I'll tell you, we don't use the guides so much, mostly the grids. So when you say okay to this, you should see what I'm seeing here now, which is that you're seeing the background with this grid on it. Now we also have snap to grid on the view menu, and that's a good idea. We can put snap to grid on here if we'd like. And we're going to start creating those 2 blue rings. We're going to make one of them, and then we're going to copy that layer to have the second one, because they're identical. In order to make those blue rings, we're going to start with a solid blue layer. And then using masks, we're going to cut out the rings. So let's start with a new layer, and it'll be a new solid. Okay, so it's layer, new solid. Good? And in this case, you can see the color I've already chosen. We want a color that's sort of a rich dark blue so that the text will show up well. And we're going to say that we want it to be in the same size as the composition. So under here it says make comp size, and that'll just fill the page. Say okay. And now we see why we want those bright green lines, because they show up well on the blue. We're going to use the grid to make a perfect circle. And then we're going to make another perfect circle inside of it. Unfortunately, because of the size of this layer, you can see that the center here of the page or the frame is not exactly on the center of the grid. So we're going to have a design that's just a skosh off center. But if we do everything consistently, it'll be all right. So I'm going to start by choosing the tool that's going to make these circular masks. It's going to be the ellipse tool up here on the toolbar. We haven't used too many of these tools, but they are just the same as you would find in Illustrator or Photoshop, almost identical. So the ellipse tool is going to be the tool to make the perfect circle. And what I want to do is I want to find the square here that would basically be 5 squares wide, and then 5 squares tall. That should be a perfect circle. And you should see that your 4 points are hitting in the middle of this outside of those squares. I didn't say that very well. But the 4 points for the circle should be at 12 o'clock, 3 o'clock, 6 o'clock, and 9 o'clock exactly. And there it is, okay? So that's the outside of the ring. Now I'm going to make a second circle that's going to start in at this corner here. Now this looks a little illogical, but you'll see it actually comes out just right. And I'm going to make my second circle in there. So it looks to me as though, here's my deep royal blue solid, number 2. And if I make the first mask an add mask and the second mask a subtract mask, then I get the nice ring. Are we good? Everybody's
yeah.
Yes.
Just for a moment.
Fabulous.
You know, your audio was going.
Well, I've had a very scratchy audio. It's one of the reasons I had to re-record the lesson from last week, because the audio was so terrible I couldn't even tell what I was saying. So let's see. Now I've extended the length of this, the runtime for this solid to the full length of the composition. And I now have a deep royal blue solid 1 and a deep royal blue solid 2. Who showed up? Let's see who's here.
Ruby.
Ruby. No, I don't see Ruby.
Yeah, I'm seeing.
Oh, there she is. Okay, okay, good.
I legit just woke up.
Oh no.
Yeah, my alarm never went off, and
Okay.
now my eyes are still adjusting to the screen.
Oh boy. Well, I'll tell you, Ruby, we were getting such a late start. We had problems with this meeting. Ugh. So I don't think I've been teaching for more than 10 minutes, maybe.
Okay.
And I started to record it at some point, about 5 minutes ago, maybe, so that you could see what I've just done. Would give you a chance to probably jump in on this lesson and be able to finish it with us. But right now, gosh, how can I get Ruby started? Ooh. Okay, all right. Well, let's do this. Let's suppose that I've only made one of these layers, okay? So I'm gonna take the second layer here, I'm gonna select it, and I'm gonna delete it, okay? So then we could say that really all I've made is this first one. You can tell they're very similar, right? And so, yeah, I think this is okay. All right, so I've made this one set of rings, or this one ring, and I made it, I'll just tell you, Ruby, you might be able to just jump in here. I made it by starting with a blue layer, solid blue layer.
And this is After Effects?
Yeah, this is After Effects. Okay. I'm going to have to just go back a little bit if I'm going to bring you into this, Ruby. So maybe you just have to watch me work for a second.
Yeah, it's fine.
Okay. So the first thing, I'm going to say that I want a new layer now. And just watch what I do, and you can probably follow along. It's going to be a new solid, okay? And I'm finding the new layer menu here, solid settings. I'm going to find a good solid blue, dark blue color like this. And say I want to make my layer comp size. I'm going to make it this color and say okay. And I'll have a fully blue layer like that. To get the grid on it, I want to go to the preferences settings for grid, okay? And make the grid, you'll see, I made the grid a really bright green. And I said every 80 pixels with subdivisions at 4. And that's really all you have to do. And say okay. And you'll get this bright grid on it, okay? We did this so we could draw 2 perfect circles, one inside the other, okay? So how did we do that? Well, go to the toolbar up here and find the rectangle tool is hiding some other tools underneath it. It's just like working with Photoshop. Underneath the rectangle tool is also an ellipse tool. So take the ellipse tool and now look at the center of the picture here. Whoops, my bad. Look at the center here. And you're going to try to find a square that's 5 squares by 5 squares. By a square, I mean this little unit here. And I'm going to click up here. All right. Whoops. Wait a minute. I'm gonna click and drag. And as I drag, I'm just gonna keep an eye on what I'm doing here. I wanna get to exactly this part where I've got a vector point at 12 o'clock, 3 o'clock, 6 o'clock, and 9 o'clock. And they're just hitting the grid. Do you see that? So that's a perfect square and it's centered on the page, all right? So that's pretty good. Then to cut out the middle of it, what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a second circle. It starts here. Now this looks a little like it couldn't possibly be right, but you'll see it actually works out. I'm going to make that one, again, hitting the grid at 12 o'clock, 3 o'clock, 6 o'clock, and 9 o'clock. And that makes a second concentric circle. But on that circle, I'm just going to get this out of the way here. On that circle, this is the first mask up here that I made. This is the second mask. The first mask is an add mask. It adds the color. But the second mask would be a subtract, and that punches the hole. Okay. So there you get a nice, perfect ring. And it's our second ring, so we have the 2 rings that we need. If you were doing this from scratch, I would recommend you make 1 ring and then just choose it and say Command D, and that duplicates it for a second ring. Okay. I'm also going to change the name here of this ring from Deep Blue Royal Solid 3 to Deep Blue Royal Solid 2. Someone else just came in. Don't know who it is yet. A mystery guest. So.
Good morning, Professor. It's me, Jonah.
Oh, hi, Jonah. How are you?
We had another COVID death last night in the family, so I've been up all night pretty much. I just remember we had class. I apologize for being late.
It's okay. It's okay. I was telling John I'm sort of in the same position, so I'm going to rename this to Deep Blue Solid 2. Okay. There we go. Okay. So this is a little tricky. I'm recording it, which may be able to get you, maybe you can sort of catch up if you watch the recording afterwards, because it's kind of complicated what we're doing.
Okay, yes, I can see you have it recorded.
I have been recording it. Okay, so we'll see. So I have the Deep Blue Solid 1 and the Deep Blue Solid 2 are really the same. You could make the first one and Command D to duplicate it for the second one. That's a nice shortcut. But for now, I just want to show you how to do the text on the top. And this is where I wanted everyone to go back and practice with their pen tool if you haven't used it in a while. But I don't know, sometimes every student in my class is really perfectly comfortable with the pen tool and sometimes not. But I'm just going to take one of these, like, I'm going to turn on the text that I made about an hour and a half ago, she said, and it looks like that, okay? So the idea is to be able to do 2 things with the text. One thing is to be able to get it inside or looking exactly like it fits on the ring. And the other thing is to get it positioned on the same z-axis as the ring so that you'll see, if I show you the finished one, let's go back to comp 1, it actually shows through the ring. Do you see how that works? You can see the word save on both sides of the ring. You can see the word the on both sides of the ring, right? They're actually in the exact same plane as the ring itself. So the way we get that is to create it at what is essentially Z0. And I'm just going to stop this for a second. And then you'll see it'll be sort of embedded in the ring that you've made. So I'm going to go back to the project that we're working on. And I'm going to say that I want to make a new layer that's going to be a text layer. Okay, and this will be the way of getting started, and then you can copy it and make the second text layer from the first. So I'm just going to turn this off for a second. It's kind of confusing. And I'm going to even, let's see, I only need one of these. I'll turn this one on, this one off. And now I've selected this upper ring. I'm going to make a text layer from home. There I am at home. I'm going to make a text layer. Take your T and just click on top of your project. The text layer, as with these solid layers, shows up as a solid layer. And they all have this same color, which is the dark red brick color. And then I'm going to look at my text menu over here. And I'm going to say that I want this to be, guess what, impact, my favorite. No, it really works very well. Impact works very well. I want this, so I want the font to be impact. I want it to be regular. There is no bold on impact. I want it to be 80 pixels high, okay? And at this point, then that's really sort of all I have to know. I've got my blinker here, so I'm just going to type in all caps. Put your caps on and type save. Wait a minute. Did I get that? Text. Yeah, I got the text. Come on. My text selection, okay. I want to type save. Oh, well, this is going to be funny looking at first. Let's put the caps lock back on. Save the oceans. Oceana, ocean, oceana, oceana, something, yeah. Save the oceans. Okay, so I lost track of this one here. So I'm going to go back and now make it into impact again. Sorry. You can type I and it'll probably take you right to impact. Impact, there it is. And what I want to do here is I want to take this is the tracking between the letters. I want to take it back to about 400 at this point. Just type in 400 because we've got them so far apart that you can't really see what we're doing. So I'm just going to get rid of that. All right, there's the save the oceans. Now, if you've done this in one of the MMP, if you've done this in MMP 100 or one of the other design classes, placing text around a path is what we're going to do next. What's important is to make sure that the path that we set is on the same layer as the text layer. And of course, one is inclined, I'm just going to delete that. There's an empty text layer there. One is inclined to click and end up moving your text onto a separate layer. So we're not going to do that. We're going to be really careful about this. And I'm just going to take the cursor and move the text a little bit out of the way while I do this next part of the operation. Because what I'm going to do now is I'm going to make a path around the outside of this ring that is going to be the path where the text will be placed. And if you recall, having done this in other classes, you can't close that path. You don't want that to actually be a circle. It'd be easy if we just could make a circle inside there. But it has to be what's called an open path, or basically a line. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to take the pen tool, and we're going to create a line that's just a little bit inside the circle here. So I'm going to start here with my first point on the pen tool. And then I'm going to make my second point over here, just a little bit inside the thing. And this one I'm going to pull. So I get a curve. And you know, I see that I still have, I think I still have the snap to grid on. I'm going to get rid of that because it's pushing it to the inside layer there. And then I'm going to make my next one. These are points that are intended to be curved points. That's why you're pulling the handles out so you can manage them. They don't have to be perfect because we can go back and fix them. That's one of the things that's very nice about the pen tool. You can always fix things. But up here, we want to make sure that we don't close this path. We just want this path to be nearly a circle, but not a closed one. So I'm just going to click here for my last point, kind of give it a little bit of curve there. And this is pretty good. For fixing this up now, I'm going to move this point over a little bit. And I'm going to push it around, push these handles around, these vector handles, to make it a little bit better. Now, don't forget, I've been doing this for a long time, so I do it really fast, and I don't fuss with it too much. But you don't have to have a perfect circle. You just need to have, there, that's almost good enough right there. You just need to have this path with a little hole in the top. Because now, in the Save the Oceans layer, if I crank this open, and we say, that I want to, I'm going to look at my mask. I have mask 1 there. And then it says, do I want a path option for my text? And yes, I do. I want to choose a path option. And the path option, guess what, is mask number 1. That's the thing we just made. So when I do that, ta-da, it places the text inside the mask. Now this is obviously, some of it is impact and some of it isn't. But using the text tool, I can always fix that. Just grab the text tool, get in here if I can, there it is, and select what I want to be impact. Are you following this? Have you all done something like this before? I used to teach MMA. I had to teach MMA 100 to help my faculty out because we were all so exhausted by teaching that class. We had to pass it around. And so I used to teach MMA 100, and this is where you use this kind of skill. But anyway, there it is. So I've pretty much got this thing placed inside that that ring. And what I would do next then, because if I were just starting out doing this, why would I want to do extra work? Is I would copy this layer, Save the Oceans, get it to the full length of the composition. I would just Command D, duplicate it, and then I would get in here like this and retype over the word oceans, planet, save the planet. Then I'd have a Save the Oceans and a Save the Earth, or Save the Planet, whichever you prefer. I'd have 2 different text layers. That's really what we're looking for. We want 2 different text layers. And then to sort of plot out the text properly on each one of them, just want to deselect here. I would go back to this, where's my character menu? There it is. Go back to this, this is the tracking between the characters, and you can make this larger or smaller to get a little bit more space between the characters if need be, so that they read a little bit better. You could also just insert an actual space right here. I think that would do it, sort of even it out. Okay. So now I have Save the Oceans and I have Save the Planet. I also have the 2 royal blue solids. So what we want to do is we want to make the royal blue solids the parent of the children which will be the text layers. Does that make sense to you? Do you understand what I'm talking about here? Let's look at the finished product here again. And you can see how basically the movement is being placed on the rings and the text just follows along, right? So that's a typical relationship between parent and child. And if you look at how this has been stacked up over here, I'll just stop it for a second. You can see that the blue solid here is the parent of Save the Planet. And the blue solid here is the parent of Save the Oceans. So that's really what we want to do. Then we're going to create a null object and parent the two rings. They will be the parent for the two rings. But let's just go back to where we are here in our project. And we can say that we want to see who the parents are. So who's the parent for Save the Earth? Save the Earth could be solid 1 or solid 2. Let's make it solid 1. Okay. And then Save the Oceans, let's make that solid 2. Now, they're all stacked up on each other at this point. They're all just like one, they're not even 1 pixel thick, you know, they're on the 0 position for the z-axis when we make them into 3D layers. So what we're going to do now is we're just going to go down the 3D. If you can't see this, I'll get you a little bit, try to zoom in here a little bit. But there is a little, there's a little cube here that I'm trying to get you to see on the timeline. And that cube is change this layer to 3D. So we're going to change all 4 of those layers to 3D. You can see here when we get done, all of our layers are going to be 3D. But for now, this is what we need, is to have these 4 layers 3D. And if we're correct in the way we've done this, when I crank open the deep blue layer and I crank open the transform menu, I now see the transform menu with all 3 axes available to us. So the X, the Y, and the Z. So for instance, if I were to take now the Y-axis and start to rotate it, let's start to rotate the Y-axis, I should see that that layer is rotating around the Y-axis, you see it? And let's get rid of, I don't want to see the masks, it's a little confusing here. Let's get rid of the masks. So that we just see, let's see that Y rotation again. I want to be at the endpoint here, home, when I do this. So there's that rotation. But we wouldn't want to see that on both of them at the same time. What we would like is to have this one rotated, but this one not. So I'm going to go to the deep blue solid 2, and I'm going to change the rotation here to, I'm sorry, it took me a while to get here. And that's unfortunate. Okay, ta-da, finally. That's what we want. And the only thing I can say is you can see just a little bit of this layer, right? And that's good because otherwise it just disappears on you. It sort of blinks out. So now the question would be, how would I get these 2 things to move together? Because now I've started with this and I've gone to this. But as you can see in the final project, what I want is to be able to do this. I want them to act together, right? So what we're going to do with that is we're just going to put a null object in place. A null object is actually another layer, kind of acts like a super adjustment layer, but on top of this stack. starting at the home point, I'm just going to say that I want a new layer, and that new layer will be a null object. Now, this is going to be using a null object to control the motion of those things that are below it. But you can use a null object for many other things as well. You can use it to lift and lower the volume on your movie. You can still use the null object for many, many things. For our purposes, though, this is going to be an easy one. We're just going to take the null object layer, make sure that it's the length of comp, so that, come on, let's get some of this stuff out of the way. Make sure that the null object is the length of comp. And this little red thing here in the middle, this is the null object, but you don't see it. You just see the action that it has on the things below it. And what we're going to do is we're going to say that the deep blue solids are going to have the null object as their parent. So null2 is going to be their parent. Both of those deep blue objects, null2. And then if I crank open the null and I start to use the null as the object that will be the parent, I have to change it also to a 3D layer. That's that little cube again. If I say, well, you know, now I'm going to go home, and what do I want the null object to do? Let's say I want the null object to do an X rotation. Okay, so I say at this point there's a 0 rotation, but at this point there's 1 rotation. Don't make these too fast for this because you can't read the text if they get too fast. So in doing that, since both of those layers then are children of the null, when I do that, you should be able to see that. Now, I just jumped back to composition 1. Let's do this on comp 3 where we're working. And make sure that, okay. So I made 1 rotation on the X. Let's do a rotation starting out here on the Y. So you can see that. I'm going to put a keyframe there. It says no rotation. And someplace out here, maybe 2 rotations. Again, don't do too much because you can't read the text. Now caps lock will refresh it. And let's see what we've got. It's taking me back to comp 1. Why? We want comp 3. I'm going to try for a RAM preview. It's still taking me back to comp 1. Isn't that wild? Having trouble with this today. There it is. Woohoo! You can see that it's having a little trouble setting up the RAM on this. But this is exactly what we want to have happen with the null object controlling both of those rings together. Okay, so to get this a little bit less jumpy in the beginning, I'm going to let that X rotation be a lot slower. But you can see that what's happening here is that the null object is controlling the blue rings, and the blue rings have embedded the text. So far, it really makes sense, I think, to see how the null object comes into play, especially with this, there we go, very nice. There we go. Especially with a simple combination like these 2 rings. Okay, so everything that we've done so far, these are all 3D layers at this point. And if I introduce something that's not a 3D layer, you'll see how it kind of doesn't know where to sit. But the first thing I'm going to do now is I'm just going to take off the grid because I don't need it at this point. I don't need to show the grid. Let's see our design a little cleaner. And then let's take this earth. We have this earth here, and let's put that in the design. It's very big, isn't it? Wow. I had no idea. I haven't used this in a while. Okay, so let's transform that. That's more like it. Maybe a little bit more, huh? Like that. Okay, so there's the earth. And what happens is that if the earth isn't a 3D layer, notice how the rings will not respect the right position for the earth. Watch what happens. Well, where's my earth? How about putting the earth in at the beginning? There we go. And how about making it the length of the composition? And it looks like it still has a black surround around it, so maybe I have to go back to Photoshop and trim it. You can always edit the original, and you can do that. Edit original. What would have been faster and better? What would have been faster and better? We could have done this in After Effects by just putting a mask around the little circle and say that that's an add mask. And we could have done it right there. Maybe I should just do that. Let's do this. Okay. Oh, I'm gonna do that. I'm just gonna go in here. I'm gonna make this a little bit bigger so I can see what I'm doing. Make it like 100%. Now, I don't have that many things running right now, and yet my computer's acting as if it's unhappy and out of RAM, which is not true. It can't possibly be true. Come on. There we go. So now I'm just going to take that rectangular marquee here and go get a circle like that. God knows I've done this before, folks. I wouldn't recommend it entirely. And then I'm going to move that over a little. There we go. And there it is. I just put a little mask around it so I didn't have to go back and fix it. But there it is. Now, if I make that into a 3D, if I don't make that into a 3D layer, if I just leave it the way it is, and then I start to run the animation, you're going to see that the layers don't respect that the earth is in the middle of the gyroscope. They act as if the earth is on top. Get rid of this there, and we'll just play it. And you see what I mean? The earth is just sitting on top, right? Because the earth doesn't have a Z component until we make it a 3D layer. The minute I make it a 3D layer, it's going to go sit in the middle of the animation. So here I'm taking the earth and I'm making it 3D. I just made it a 3D layer. And now you can see that this ring is in front of it now. And that ring is no longer, the earth is no longer sitting on top. The earth is now in front, is now in the middle of the gyroscope, so to speak, so that the things are moving around it. Right? So this is the beauty of being able to work with 2D and 3D layers in the same composition. But I'm just going to go back to fit here, get this to fit. And now it wouldn't be so bad to get some of those lighting effects on here and make this a little bit prettier, a little bit nicer. So in order to show a lighting effect, you can't just throw lights onto a black background, but you lose everything, right? So I'm going to put a background behind this that is going to act as a catcher of light and shadow. So let me just get my stuff back together again. I'm going to say U to close up some of these layers. When you hit the U key, you close up the layers to just show the few things you might have left in there, some keyframes or whatever. So now I'm going to make a solid layer, a new solid, but this time I don't want to make it black or something. I want to make it a medium color so that I can cast shadows and lights on it. So I think I'm going to try, you know, it looks nice if you do something in a warm tone sometimes. It looks kind of good to have something that looks sort of, well, we'll try this one. I sometimes use green, sometimes orange, but in any case, it says that I'm making this the size of the composition at this point. So I want to get it down behind everything else, put it behind everything. And now I want to make sure that if I cast a shadow or light or something, that this, this layer is far enough back on the z-axis that it's behind the rings turning around. So I'm going to take this layer and open up the transform. And just for position here, I make it a 3D layer. And for position, if I want to make it go back away from me, what is my, what do I do to the z-axis? Do I make it a bigger or a smaller number? Anybody know this? You know this. So you're taking 3D. What makes it go away from you? What's the position of the z-axis that makes it go away from you? Do we know? I'm going to say 500. Aha! So what happens when you push it back that far is that it's not big enough to fill the frame, because this is actually 3D stuff now. So if I take a piece of cardboard or a piece of plywood and I push it behind the object, eventually it's getting smaller and smaller in the perspective. So let's see what happens if I run the animation, because all we need is we just need this to be back far enough so that the rings don't appear to be disappearing into it as they run around. In other words, you want to make sure that those rings look like they're well ahead or well in front of that background. So I'm just going to try that. And when it plays, if the rings seem to be disappearing at the gold, then it's not right. Let's try RAM preview here. Okay, so the rings are entirely in front of the gold. Okay, so now I'm just going to bring the gold. I put that gold sheet 500 pixels back. I'm going to try it at 400. I want to get some light and shadow on it. If I send it too far back, it's hard to get the lights and shadows to be caught on it. So I'm just going to pull that forward a little bit more. And let's see what happens if I scale it out so that I'm just going to unconnect the X and the Y here and scale this to fill the frame. Take the Y, scale it to fill the frame. Okay. So now again, you know, this should still be far enough behind what I'm doing that I don't lose any of the animation into that background. Okay. I don't like that very first part where it's too fast, but we'll see what this looks like. So all we have to do now is we just have to add a light, and then we have to readjust all the 3D layers so that they are layers that accept or do not accept light, accept or do not accept shadow. And if you're used to working in Maya or Cinema 4D, you have to do that anyway. It's the same old, same old. So let's take this deep orange solid right now and say in material options, because I'm on it, that it's going to accept Shadows, yes, it's going to accept lights. It doesn't have to cast shadows because there's nothing behind it. It doesn't have to have light transmission because there's nothing back there but blackness. So I'm going to say that's what I've got for the deep orange. And then I'm going to go through these others and add the material options to them. So here's the deep blue solid. I want it to cast a shadow. Yes. It doesn't have to have light transmission. Accept shadows, accept lights. How much light, ambient, you can go through that and fix that to make it look really pretty. And then the save the earth, these guys, they are the children of the blue rings, so we don't have to worry about them. But the other blue ring, again, material options. Let's make sure we get that set up. Cast shadows, on, light transmission, accept shadows, accepts lights, ambient diffuse, blah, blah. And again, you can make them metallic, make them shiny, do whatever you want. And then the earth here, I'm just going to say that it casts shadows, yes. And that's about it. Okay. But now we need a light, right? So the light is also a layer. And that layer is a new layer. It's going to be a light layer. And you say, what kind of light do you want? Well, I always start with a spotlight because, you know, it can make the most dramatic shadows, right? So it says, what's your intensity? What's your cone angle? What's your cone feather? I make my cone feather much less than that. This is a big cone feather. Some fall off, smooth, and cast shadows. Yes. Okay. Okay. And now it just gives you the light, right? There it is. And if you've used these lights in other programs doing other things, you can tell that you're going to have to move this a little bit and get it all out in front of some of these things or it's not going to look nice. So I'm just going to start working with the light a little bit, but if you're familiar with this, you know how to do this, okay? So on the transform, again, you know, what position do you want for the light in the Z rotation is really, I think, what you want to see. Because the farther away I put it, the more extreme it's going to make the shadows, right? So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull it over here, pull it over to here. Whoops, not what I wanted. Here's the X. So I'm moving the X, there it is, like that. And I'll move the Y up a little bit. And somebody just came in, Ellie came in. And let's, again, take it out in front a little bit like that. So you can see that actually there's this very, very sharp shadows going on here that are really, in my opinion, sort of unattractive. But it's not because of the position right now of the light, it's because of the quality of the light. So we don't need to have the intent that we can take the cone angle down a little bit like that. And we can certainly soften everything. We can soften the shadow darkness now is 100%. So that's one of the reasons why it looks so bizarre. You can see just as you bring that down already, some of the shadows that are being cast are being softened and so on. You can diffuse the shadow a little bit. The radius is okay, but the fall off can be less. And so on. But what I really want is I really want to see this falling onto that background. And I don't see it on the background. So let me try this again. I'm not seeing it on my gold background. Maybe too much fall off. Ooh, let's see. Well, it's starting to pick up some of that stuff. little bit more light intensity. And I may have to pull that background closer to us. Let's see. I've got the cast shadows off, but I've got accept shadows is on. See what happens if I take the position. Come on. If I put the Z position at 0, it's going to be halfway covering up the object that we've made. It's almost like you can see that we made a gyroscope and now we're dipping it into like a pot of butterscotch pudding or something. So we definitely want to push that back a little bit until it is revealing. Here's my there. So now it's behind the object that we've made. Let's see if the object that we made is still dipping into it. I think it is. You see how in the back, the paddles seem to sort of go down into the liquid of the gold background. So what I'll do, I think, is we just have to get that a little further back, right? Till, let's see. Ooh, too far, too far, too far. Okay. And then again, we could lift the cone angle up. You know, there's other things we could do on the light that would change this. But I think that's a better position for it. So my cone angle could be just a little bit more. Get a little more light on that. And oops, going in the wrong direction there. So again, we don't want this to be so dramatic that you can't read or see the message, but we also, I think, kind of get a nice spacey look. Let's see, there's what it looks like. I don't like those first. There's too much movement there in the beginning. But you can see that once we start to slow it down a little bit, we start to get that nice feel. All right. I'm lightening up the shadows a little bit. I'm making the fall off distance a little bit more. And see what that looks like. And I just want to fix that. I really don't like that movement in the beginning where the whole thing is sort of spinning around. I'd like to fix that. That's on the null object, I believe, but it might be someplace else. Let's see where we are here. That. And so this goes from 0 to 1 rotation. Right. This goes 0 to 2 rotations. And then the Z rotation doesn't exist. Well, one thing that can be nice is to take a Z rotation and sort of put it on top of one of these Y rotations. So I could try that. Here's a Z rotation starting out here. And then I'll just make it go a long way, really a very long way. Okay, so let's see what that looks like. See, it's still swishing around like that. It looks like it's on that one ring. I should really check that one ring and see which one it is. Maybe I ended up with a funny rotation on it. Okay, but this is the basic idea. And as you can see, it makes a really nice kind of fun portfolio piece. And we almost always do it in April, which is when Earth Day is. And so it's kind of timely. But it's still a little dark. I would get rid of some of the shadows, some of the fall off. I would make the light just a little bit broader. And see, that's where it's weird, right there. It's on one of these. It's not in the null object. The null object is not the problem here. This is in one of these. Yes, there it is. There we go. Okay, there's the Y rotation is 0. There's the Y rotation is 0. There's the Y rotation is lots. Make the Y rotation 1. All right, this one goes out. Okay, home, play. Need to see that. So I think it's very handsome. I mean, I also have someplace I could dig it out for you, that what I call the Star Wars movie, where all the stars are constantly flying away from you. You know, it's one of those stock things. And I've put that in the background too, but I think it's a little corny. I think it's nicer to just have this. It's handsome. When the light picks up the text, it looks very nice, I think. And it's really a good demonstration. See, that's still flipping around a little bit too fast for me. But it's a good demonstration, I think, of how you can use AfterEffects to do a nice job with this 3D suggestion. It's not actual 3D, but it's 2.5D, as they say.
It's lovely. It's lovely. It's art. I like it.
Who said that?
John.
Well, John, you always like it. How about somebody else? No, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding.
What do you guys think? Are they sleeping on us, Professor?
They're all going to the refrigerator and fixing themselves sandwiches. I can tell. I can tell. All right. So one thing I would do right away, I can tell, is that I really think that the light has to be a little less dark. I mean, I've got a very dark environment here for this, and I don't think it's not as nice as it could be. So I would just liven up the light a little bit more. And it could just be lifting the intensity, you know. I mean, there's a certain amount of just how much light are you using. And you could bring it in a little bit closer, but I don't like to get hot, bright spots when you use a spotlight. You know, this is a spotlight. You got to be careful that you're not just blaring it on a single, you know, on one part of the composition. Yeah, I think it's okay. It's a little bit, there's a little bit too much wiggling around at the beginning. But you see how nicely those rings go together. They really look very good. And if you want, you can rotate them a little bit to make it easier to read them. Like I see the Save the Oceans is a little hard to read because it's kind of upside down and backwards when it's behind, when it's away from you. Now you can read it okay. But I think it's a handsome piece. And if you like fooling around with lights, you can do more than one light, and you can do a more interesting background. You could put this, you know, on a background of an ocean or a background of a forest, and it would be okay too.